Okay, really like to get every one of these so that I can move on from squats and do the news. Zach Whitaker, TechCrunch. Google's Project Zero finds 18 zero-day vulnerabilities, including 4 top severity flaws affecting some Samsung phones and other devices with Exynos chipsets. Good. My favorite engineer is the one who cleans up after everybody else and ensures that there's the minimum possible chance of a machine being compromised in a way that harms its user or users. That's obviously a extremely complicated task, particularly as our machines are now more or less all interconnected with one another. And so Google going after significant issues inside of Android, there's a glass half full way to look at this and say, you're doing the right thing and you deserve some goodwill for doing it. The pessimistic version is, are you making sure that this press gets out there in order to artificially encourage people to think well of you so that the rest of your business practices aren't as heavily scrutinized? But I'll take the positive view. It's kind of concerning to me that there are 0 days and then top severity flaws. My understanding was that 0 day is kind of as bad as it gets. So the idea that there's something worse than a 0 day sort of reminds me of the first summer or first winter for me that I saw the temperature color graph or chart that Australia uses to observe the ambient air temperature in the summertime and how they had to add a new color at the end of the chart because they had never measured temperatures as hot as they got. Ugh. Ingrid London, TechCrunch. SVB Financial files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the SDNY bankruptcy court and, quote, believes it has approximately $2.2 billion of liquidity. I feel like we're going to need a short name, sort of hashtag for the SVB saga. SVB saga? Well, Silicon Valley saga? Venture malarkey? I love the word malarkey. The idea that a bank, which, while it may have some unique characteristics, or had some unique characteristics in terms of the type of customer it did business with, and in some cases the type of services that it provided, but to my knowledge, not that many things were unique on that side of the table. The idea that it was responsible for holding such significant numbers in deposits. I don't have a number in my head, but if you think about it as the dominant bank for small companies that have taken outside investing from venture firms or elsewhere, I mean, their sort of assets under management, to borrow a term from another part of the financial industry, it's got to be 100x this number, right? Like $200 billion. That maybe that's too big, but is $100 billion too big? I don't think so. It would be shocking to me if the total number of deposits that it held was less than $100 billion, because you're talking about servicing hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses which are taking outside financing. It's measured in the tens of millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the round. So the notion that this entity somehow got to a place where it had 1/100th, 1/50th in liquid, the amount of money it was responsible for holding on behalf of its customers. Ah, John Brodkin, Ars Technica. The FCC is requiring carriers to block SMS messages from, quote, invalid, unallocated, or unused numbers, unquote, targeting the increase in scam robotexts sent to consumers. I mean, I'll take what I can get in terms of effective government intervention in private markets, but am I the only one who feels like we're past peak phone number? Like, does it feel arcane to anyone else to meet someone for the first time and take 10 digits as the primary way to address that person from there forward? It just seems absurd to me, given all of the ways in which we can communicate with one another utilizing the internet, that we still, most of us, default to saying, just give me this string of digits that was bestowed upon you by your network provider, and I'll use that as my primary mode. And I don't think there's any better evidence that we're past the point where that was the best thing to do than the number of unwanted and suspicious pieces of inbound communication that the average person gets. The fact that the FCC is doing this with regard to SMS messages is cute. Do you not know anyone who also gets phone calls from bullshit numbers? FCC? Like, you didn't think to address the other way in which this is a drain on everyone's collective psychic energy? Like, stop it. I mean, I hate to say it, but one of the best returns on investment as a nerd that I have made in the last 25 years was taking the primary phone number that I had and that everyone knew and handing it over to Google and saying, you forward calls to this number to me, because then I have an application that can live on any of the devices I use where I get to control. Don't bother me after 7 p.m. when I'm home for the day and spending time with my family. I'm not going to pick up the phone. Leave a voice message if you're an authentic human being who's trying to get in touch with me, and I'll return that call. But if you're just a robot who's trying to prey on the Pavlovian response that I have to pick up the phone whenever it rings, I want nothing to do with that. And again, I'll take what I can get. Hopefully, this is a baby step toward making the phone number a little easier to live with, but I strongly encourage everyone who hears this, stop using your phone number. Get an email address, get a Signal account, get a Twitter username, get all of those things and more, and hand those out. Say, oh, you want to get in touch with me? Here's the best way to do it. Emily Baker White, Forbes. Sources: the FBI and DOJ are investigating what led TikTok's parent company ByteDance to use the app to surveil U.S. journalists. Source: ByteDance was subpoenaed. The clumsiness of that headline we're just going to leave aside. Speaking of things that deserve their own short name. I kind of feel like referring to the ByteDance story as the tale of the sacrificial wolf. ByteDance is no lamb in this scenario. TikTok is a tool which provides, I'd love to see data that counters this point of view. I'd love to be proven wrong, but appears to significantly advantage the Chinese state over the users outside of China, right? There have been stories about how TikTok in China behaves much differently. It looks much more like an educational tool and has significant guardrails in order to prevent creating an undesirable relationship between the user and the tool. None of those things exist in the United States. None of those things exist in Europe. None of those things seems to exist in any other market where ByteDance wants to do business. And that fact, I think, alone is enough to get the state governments of a lot of these markets where TikTok is in operation to take a second look. And so I think that there is a sacrificial aspect to this is a tool of a state that the Western world has a difficult time relating to, put it that way for now. But it's not a lamb. It's not innocent. And so to the extent that everybody aligns to take some disciplinary or curtailing action against ByteDance, I want to call it the sacrificial wolf from now on. Sarah Fisher, Axios. YouTube lifts restrictions imposed after the January 6th insurrection on Trump's channel after evaluating the, quote, continued risk of real-world violence, unquote. We are the content moderators. That's the end game, at least from my point of view. The ultimate backstop that YouTube very clearly and rightly references here is there a risk of violence in the real world? I'm not sure that there are any arguments to support the claim that what Donald Trump puts out on the internet through whatever medium or platform may be available to him is likely to incite real world violence. I know that may sound naive or short-sighted or cavalier, but we had that moment. We had a very visceral moment as a nation when a significant number of people decided that they were not going to obey the instructions of Capitol Police and other forms of crowd control, and they were going to force their way into the Capitol building. I'm sure there's a legal scholar somewhere who would point out that in some sense the Capitol building belongs to the citizens of the United States, and so what law did they violate by trespassing? How strenuous a penalty should someone face for trespassing? It's a whole thing, and it's not over yet. We're still adjudicating it as a people. I don't need to take a position on it. I simply need to point out Donald Trump's had the ability to speak to the public since the 6th of January. Has he had a Twitter account? No. Has he had a YouTube account? No. Has he had an Instagram account? I don't know. Is he on TikTok? I don't know. Was he ever on Peach? Would have been cool. But there's not a lot of evidence to support the idea that he, what he may communicate to the public is likely to incite real world violence. I, however, am confident that in the event that he re-engages on any of these platforms, and there does appear to be some direct correlation between what he says on these platforms and the concern of real world violence, YouTube will be more than happy to revisit this decision. So we'll see. Michael Kozlowski, good e-reader. Amazon stops selling newspaper and magazine subscriptions for Kindle and print and plans to shut down Kindle Newsstand in September 2023. There have been many a depiction in popular media over my lifetime of e-ink newspapers, right? Of a broadsheet that someone would sit and hold in their hands as they take mass transit to work that shows them the news, but it's a computer and it's alive and the content on the page changes. Like, that's a dream that many people have had for quite some time. The Kindle, I personally I don't own one. I owned the very first one that looked like some bizarro piece of sci-fi tech from another solar system. But the news business, the extent to which information about what happens in the world is still wrapped in a value add by a particular institution, frankly, that's up for grabs these days. There are a number of institutions that still are still highly regarded, but it's not what it used to be. And so the idea that it's worth operating an aspect of the Kindle business to ensure that there's a pipeline to deliver whatever today's Wall Street Journal or Financial Times or San Francisco Chronicle or whatever to that device, well, how much does it cost to do that every year? Is it worth continuing to spend that money? Would appear Amazon has come to the decision that it's not. And while reading on e-ink is a delightful experience, if you haven't done it, I highly recommend it. How many devices do people want to carry around? Wall Street Journal. A shortage of skilled workers is impeding Micron's goal of a chip manufacturing campus in Syracuse, New York, where it plans to invest $100 billion and hire 9,000 employees. Building real things in America is a good idea. We should continue to make those investments. It is great that Micron wants to bring 9,000 jobs to the Syracuse area. My question, though, is my frustration is how common the refrain from any business that wants to make an investment in the United States, whether they've been here for a long time or not, the U.S. job market, I think is more specifically what I mean, which is there aren't enough skilled workers. The distance, the delta between the educational opportunities in the United States and what the major employers in the United States, both the established ones and the up-and-coming ones, that gap, for my money, and maybe this is just because I've been underemployed for a number of years, is it's this area where both of those entities, the educational institution and the employer, seem to want to turn their back and say, "Oh, it's not my responsibility." For as much money as, let's pick on Google, a business like Google has on its balance sheet, the idea that they have not yet created a mechanism by which they can take someone who simply graduated high school in America and turn them into an entry-level knowledge worker that is useful to their organization, I just find that absurd, preposterous, insulting, that they seek to prosper and do business and want to employ current moment of, layoffs notwithstanding, a significant number of people to do any number of things, and yet the ability to create skilled workers, they completely wash their hands of. And Google's not alone in this circumstance. I just don't have any more patience for the idea that there is a significant employer in the US job market that says, we would love to hire a huge number of people, but we can't find people with the skills. And then they do nothing. Meanwhile, the pipeline to get educated enough to get a meaningful job is, it hasn't seen major improvements since the end of World War II. Show me the evidence where the floor has been raised on how we educate young adults in order for them to be a possibility for added value in the economy. I just don't see it, and it's not okay. Mitchell Clark, The Verge. Twitter starts showing the number of times a tweet has been bookmarked, but not by whom, initially for iOS users on the tweet details page, with plans to expand. It's always nice to see a story about Twitter where there isn't an obvious bias against the company sort of embedded in the headline of the reporting. The addition of a bookmark data point, I'm sure there are all manner of opinions here. There are people who would argue that providing some indication for a tweet's value in the most generic way possible is a good thing, and views and bookmarks together can give you a number which Twitter can then turn around and show to advertisers. That's how the game is played. I'm sure there's also a point of view which says that the like was good enough and that providing some means for users in the system to mark a tweet without revealing who they are is unfair or dirty pool something. I tend to land on the former. I tend to think that to the extent that one of, if not the dominant revenue model for Twitter as a business will continue to be advertising for the foreseeable future. Say what you will about the performance over the last, 4 months or 3 months, whatever it's been. Then being able to quantify the engagement with any given tweet in the system is an extraordinarily necessary thing. I also, as an individual user, like the idea that I can earmark a tweet to come back to at a later date for whatever reason without sending a signal that it's me who did it. Because as a user, I should be able to maintain whatever privacy I choose to maintain. Shouldn't I? Isn't that a reasonable expectation to have? Say what you will about the Twitter files and Elon's ability to go into the plumbing of the system and out whoever and whatever he feels like. So this feels like a step in the right direction. At Zoe Schiffer. Sources. Twitter downranked rivals' corporate accounts, including Instagram, Snap, and TikTok since December, as well as non-rivals like the US at HHS.gov account. This, on the other hand, easier to see or infer some bias here. I think it's noteworthy that the source for this story is Zoe Schiffer's Twitter account, not their Instagram account, not their Snap account, not a website, just a tweet. But we'll set that aside. The idea that Twitter would make the decision to have fewer mentions of their competition's products on its network, is anybody surprised? It's not new to want to do this. It's not illogical to want to do this. Is it entirely fair? No, business isn't fair, dude. Like, Instagram was able to get from 0 to 1 when it first launched by saying, hey, you've created an account on Instagram. Press these 3 buttons over here and we will reach out on the Twitter API and grab the list of everyone you follow, and we will join that with all the users in the Instagram database today, and we will hotwire your Instagram graph. Was that fair? Maybe. Does it matter? Point is, it was part of what led to Instagram Twitter's long, slow process of destroying its API the first time around. That's just a history lesson. It's not particularly relevant here. I think what's relevant here is Zoe is highlighting the need to get to a place where the recommendation algorithm that Twitter uses has some level of transparency to it. Today, there's effectively none. The closest you can get to transparency is when Elon says things like, we're currently debugging the For You recommendation algorithm. We want to open source it, but it turns out that taking 200 million tweets and filtering them down to the 200 most relevant is kind of a difficult problem, so we're going to take some time and do it internally. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but you understand the point. If Twitter wants to show you the 200 tweets that it thinks you are most likely to want to engage with, it's got to build tooling and an algorithm to do that. It has one today, according to the owner of the business. It needs a lot of work. But on some reasonable timeline, we're going to have to get to a place where the user has some knobs and switches available to them, right? And the user can say, I want 20% For You and 80% just the people I explicitly follow, right? Like, that's one knob that could ultimately get surfaced to the user. When and how that's going to happen is anybody's guess. But pointing out that there are curation decisions that Twitter is making is, I think, again, to give credit to Zoe, it's the right type of pressure to put on the company. It's more constructive than it doesn't work and the guy who owns it is a jerk and whatever other critiques you want to lay at their feet. Alexander Martin, The Record. Q&A with two of Meta's leading security experts about its online operations kill chain, a framework for responding to threat activity like influence operations. There's a lot of obtuse Pentagon-ease language there, so rather than spend a bunch of time trying to deal with the lexicon choices, let's instead try and focus on what the purpose of this story would appear to be. Meta wants to tell people about its efforts in dealing with activity on its platforms which might be considered a threat to the people on its platforms or the people as citizens in countries where it does business. We're not tremendously far away from the sort of formal starting gun of the next US presidential elections. So it would not surprise me if this was part of a PR strategy in order to buoy the idea in the minds of the people that this leviathan of a business that touches billions of people every day, both in the United States and elsewhere, that they're doing a lot to take care of us. And so when something bad happens and Meta's products act as a substrate or an accelerant or the medium for those bad things to happen, don't forget, they have all of these leading security experts, and they have this thing that they call the online operations kill chain. Like, they're not sitting around doing nothing. That's kind of the way it's the vibe I get. Reuters. New Zealand plans to ban TikTok on all devices with access to the parliamentary network by the end of March 2023 because of cybersecurity concerns. Always jealous, an American, whenever I hear about a governmental decision that's been made in New Zealand, the speed with which they implement change. That's what I'm jealous of most. But, related to what we were talking about just earlier today, TikTok the perception continues to grow that the TikTok software that lives on a device in your pocket represents more of a threat than a utility. And if you want to entertain that case for a moment, this is a country China, that decided within the last few years that they were just going to have one guy in charge for life. That's not a transition you see in nation-state governments very often in my lifetime. So to go from having an election process, however genuine that process may or may not be, to just throwing in the towel and saying, we don't need new leadership. What we need is extreme long-term thinking, which is one of the advantages you get when there's one person in charge with no way to change that. Meta, to jump out of the China story for just a moment, Meta made 2, if not 3, if you count Oculus, absolutely inspired acquisitions of technology companies in its history, I don't think it's going out on much of a limb to say if Mark had not had basically total control over the board of his company, I'm not sure those deals would have gone done, I guess is my point. So to go back to China, if you're in their shoes and you would like a little more China first uh, balance of world power, building a tool that sort of systematically degrades the attention span, if not the intellectual capacity of anyone who uses it in an inappropriate fashion. Not the worst idea in the world. Patricia Nilsson, Financial Times. Private equity firm Ethical Capital Partners acquires Pornhub's owner MindGeek, which had 460 million in 2018 revenue, and sources say profit margins near 50% at times. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. There's good money to be made in providing human beings with their most basic needs and desires. There's a really delightful poetry in Pornhub now being owned by a company called Ethical Capital Partners. I just find that especially amusing, and quite frankly, compared to some analysis of like Pornhub's value in society, call me a trad if you want to. I think the pendulum has swung quite far enough in favor of pornography. Might need to swing a little ways in the other direction toward like, oh, sex is a reward for meaningful investment in the life and well-being of a human being for whom you have physical attraction. Just my point of view. The Verge. Microsoft details Microsoft 365 Copilot's business chat, which can summarize meetings, recent customer interactions, calendar entries, and more, like Bing's AI. Related, Bloomberg, Microsoft announces Microsoft 365 Copilot, which will bring OpenAI's GPT-4 to Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Word, and its other Office apps in the coming months. Now we see for a moment I was going to snap to the iceberg analogy, right? The part of Microsoft's strategy in investing in OpenAI that was below the surface, Bing competing against Google being the aspect that's above the surface, but I'm not sure the distribution there is really accurate. But the return of Clippy, how do you not get excited about that? We're back to Clippy. We're back to a little being that will help you do all the things you do with Microsoft's productivity suite. Will this prove to be a meaningful competitive advantage for Office as compared to Google's suite of tools? Perhaps. Will this continue to make Teams more attractive as an offering than Slack? Perhaps. Will this create all manner of amusing memes about Clippy and Sydney and all the rest of it? Absolutely. And that is what excites me most.